according to a world values study by the Institute of Policy Studies that examined Singaporeans' attitudes towards institutions, politics and policies. Younger and locally born citizens and PRs are less likely to feel confident in state institutions and the government.
At least 70% of the some 2,000 respondents had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in their state institutions.
These include the government, parliament, courts, Singapore Police Force, Singapore Armed Forces and civil service relative to electoral institutions, civil society and the media.
Around 62% of respondents also feel corruption is low in Singapore.
Well, the study also revealed that about two-thirds of those surveyed are uninterested in politics. Those who had higher levels of interest were male and had higher educational qualifications and income.
Compared with other selected countries, Singaporeans expressed one of the lowest levels of political interest, above only Hong Kong and Taiwan. Conversely, in countries like China, Australia, Sweden and Switzerland, more than 40% of respondents indicated they were very interested or somewhat interested in politics.
Senior political correspondent Grace Ho is here to weigh in. Informative findings that we learnt of today, but this survey was done between November 2019 and March 2020. That's more than a year ago, even before the circuit breaker and of course GE 2020. So Grace, since then, do you think trends towards confidence in state institutions and the government have shifted?
Well, it's hard to tell because the data since then hasn't been available. But one thing that wouldn't have changed that much is the level of confidence that people have in state institutions, because these are permanent institutions. I mean, your courts, the police, the army, the civil service. And if anything, the whole of government response to COVID-19 could even have been a shot in the arm for this public perception of the government's ability to rally resources and to solve problems quickly. Generally, I think if people see that the state has performed well in the provision of public services and that it's not corrupt, then the arrival of the circuit breaker and GE 2020 probably wouldn't have changed opinions that much.
Right. Grace, one of the more significant findings was that naturalized citizens and PRs were more likely to be confident in state and electoral institutions compared with Singaporeans born here. Now, older respondents were also more likely to have high levels of confidence. Why are we not seeing, though, similar sentiments among younger and locally born citizens?
Yeah, so, they have more confidence not just in these institutions, but also confidence in the government in general compared to younger respondents. It may be because older Singaporeans have experienced effective government policy decisions and they saw, major progress in Singapore's society, infrastructure, and the economy over the decades. So they've had a longer runway to develop higher levels of trust. Conversely, younger respondents who grew up in an already highly developed economy might not have witnessed that huge margin of progress that the government made. And this might explain the hesitation to accord high levels of confidence in the government. In tandem with this is also a more diverse local political scene. So we've had several newly formed political parties emerging since 2012, which was when the last survey was conducted. So when you have a more educated population with greater knowledge of different political parties, they can be expected to be more critical when they evaluate the government. As for naturalized citizens and PRs, it may be because they have their country of origin as a basis for comparison, and they might find that the economic and political situation here in Singapore is more conducive. But there is a caveat, because out of the 2012 Singaporeans surveyed in this study, just over 300 were naturalized citizens and PRs. So you have a comparatively smaller proportion of them in the sample size, and the results might not exactly be representative of the wider population of naturalized citizens and PRs.
Right. That's a really great point, Grace. So the survey also found that Singaporeans seem to be supportive of government surveillance, but not when it comes to private situations or without their prior knowledge. Why the double standard, so to speak?
Well, instead of calling a double standard, perhaps we can think of it as most Singaporeans support having some kind of surveillance in public areas because of safety and security reasons. In fact, two-thirds of them in the survey felt that the government has the right to keep people under video surveillance in public areas. So having, say, CCTVs, may have a deterrent effect. Let's say if you get robbed or assaulted, then, video records would be useful. But where Singaporeans draw the line is in private spaces or where they feel like, hey, you haven't informed me, because these are situations where the law and order imperative perhaps isn't quite so clear to many people, and they have a stronger sense that their privacy has been invaded. But again, there are differences in attitudes based on age. So older Singaporeans were more accepting of government surveillance, whether it's in public or private spaces, whether they are informed or not informed. And this could be due to, say, the digital divide between the older and younger generations. Younger Singaporeans, for example, might be more aware of dangers of attacks on their privacy, online phishing, and might be more skeptical of surveillance. But I think what is worth noting generally are the policy implications, right? So there is this wide range of attitudes towards surveillance, which means that when the government undertakes this surveillance, it has to be transparent and to also be quite careful when collecting and using citizens' data. And the other broader point also is that you can do successful government surveillance only when there continues to be a healthy baseline level of public confidence in state institutions and public satisfaction with the current political system. So all these different elements which we have discussed today, need to go hand in hand.